My name is Brooke Merritt. I am 34. 3 weeks after my mother died, my father changed her will in her living room. He set the new papers on the coffee table. He turned them toward my aunts, not me. Then he said, "You were hired by blood, not loved by it." I did not touch the papers. I set my mother's teacup back on its saucer. But here's what my father didn't know. The church envelope he had just called funeral clutter still carried my mother's sealed signature. That is why I can tell this without raising my voice. This is where the story starts. If someone in your family has ever turned your care for a dying parent into a job title, stay with me. Like and subscribe if you believe love should never be used as a bill. Let me take you back to the first winter my mother could no longer climb the stairs. The first winter my mother could no longer climb the stairs. I found her sitting on the third step with one hand on the banister and the other pressed against her chest. She was not crying. My mother did not cry where people could fix their faces for her. She looked up at me and said, "Well, this is inconvenient." That was Evelyn Merritt. She could make pain sound like a scheduling problem. I moved her bed downstairs that night. I pushed the coffee table against the wall. I folded the rug because her walker caught on the edge. By midnight, our living room had become a bedroom, a medicine shelf, and a place where the whole house learned to whisper. My father watched from the doorway with his phone in his hand. Calvin Merritt always knew where to stand. He stood where he could be thanked. He stood where a neighbor might see him carrying one pillow. Then he went back to his office before I changed the sheets. The lake house was my mother's pride. Not because it was grand, but because she had chosen it before my father understood why people loved quiet water. It was a cedar-sided house in northern Michigan with old windows and a dock that leaned left. My father called it "your mother's foolish dream" when bills came due. He called it "our place on the lake" when guests praised the view. That was how Calvin handled ownership. He criticized the cost in private and accepted the compliment in public. We were comfortable, not flashy. My mother taught Sunday school. My father sold insurance and wore pressed shirts on Saturdays. People in town called him steady. I learned early that steady sometimes meant a man could leave every hard thing to someone else and still look calm in a family photo. When my mother's diagnosis changed, the numbers changed with it. A hospital bed, a new ramp, a bathroom rail, a nurse 2 mornings a week, a stack of orange pill bottles on the kitchen counter. The care account held $420,000 for her last year, and for the house she wanted kept safe after she was gone. My father called it planning. I saw the clock inside it. The first time the pharmacy card declined, I paid with my own debit card. My mother was sitting in the car with a blanket over her knees. Snow hit the windshield in little taps. I came back with the medicine, and my father looked at the receipt like it had insulted him. He said, "Keep the receipts if it makes you feel important." I kept them because my mother had started forgetting which pills came after dinner, and paper remembered what tired people could not. 2 weeks later, I installed a rail beside the downstairs toilet. I am not handy in a charming way. I am handy in the way a person becomes handy when no one else is coming. I watched a video twice, drove to the hardware store, bought the wrong screws, went back, and did it again. My father came home while I was tightening the last bracket. He stood in the bathroom doorway and said, "Family duty is not ownership." He said it softly. He could say a cruel thing in a voice you might use to ask for salt. My mother heard him from the living room. Her walker stopped scraping the floor. I waited for her to call him out. She only said, "Brooke, honey, can you bring me the blue cup?" The blue cup was on the side table. Her hand shook when she took it. Her thumb touched my wrist before she let go. It was the smallest thank you in the room. It was also the only honest one. By spring, my father had become very good at being grateful in public. At church, he stood beside my mother's wheelchair and accepted casseroles with both hands. He told people, "We are managing." He said "we" with a smooth face. I stood 3 feet behind him, holding the tote bag with her socks, her pills, and the appointment notes. Pastor June noticed. She noticed everything without making a performance out of it. She was not soft in the way people mean when they want a woman to be harmless. She was soft like a folded towel on a hospital chair, quiet until quiet stopped helping. After service one Sunday, my father thanked the congregation for supporting him through this difficult season. He did not say my name. My mother's hand moved under the blanket and found my fingers. She squeezed once. Pastor June saw it. So did Mrs. Larkin, our neighbor. who had brought soup every Thursday and never asked to be praised for it. That afternoon, Mrs. Larkin walked me to the parking lot. She put a foil-covered pan into my hands and said, "Your mother knows who stays." I laughed because I did not know what else to do. Mrs. Larkin only pressed the pan against my coat until I took it. In late April, my mother asked me to drive her to church on a Wednesday. It was raining hard enough to blur the road. My father said she was too tired. My mother looked at him and said, "Then I will be tired in the car." I helped her into the passenger seat. She held a cream-colored envelope on her lap with both hands. The paper had the church seal on the flap. I thought it was about hymns. My mother had been choosing hymns for weeks, mostly to keep my father from choosing songs that made him look noble. At the church, Pastor June met us at the side door. My mother asked me to wait in the hall. I could see them through the narrow window in the office door. My mother placed the envelope in Pastor June's hands. Pastor June did not open it. She only nodded, then put one hand over my mother's fingers. When my mother came out, she looked smaller, like she had folded one burden and set it down somewhere safe. "In the car," she said. "If he ever makes love sound like debt, let June open it." I asked what that meant. She closed her eyes and said, "You will know." I hated that answer. I still drove carefully. 6 weeks later, my mother died on a Tuesday morning before sunrise. The house made ordinary sounds around it. The refrigerator hummed. The heat clicked on. A truck passed outside on the road by the lake. My father stood at the foot of her bed and looked at his watch before he looked at me. A small thing can tell a large truth. The funeral home came at 9. By 11, my father had opened the desk drawer where my mother kept her house papers. He moved folders into a black leather case. I was rinsing the blue cup at the sink when I saw the green care folder disappear under his arm. I asked, "Do you need me to sort those?" He said, "You have done enough." Then he added, "Family duty is not ownership." There it was again, same words, same calm voice. Only this time, my mother was not in the room to squeeze my wrist. I dried the cup and wrote the time in the back of my grocery notebook. I did not know what I would do with that note. I only knew I wanted one place where his version of the day could not be the only one. The next morning, I looked for the care folder. It was gone. The drawer still held warranty papers, old tax envelopes, and my mother's handwritten recipe cards. The folder with the hospital bed, the ramp, the nurse receipts, and the pharmacy charges was missing. I found one scan on my laptop. It was from the day the pharmacy card failed. My name was on the payment line. The amount was not huge. It did not need to be. It proved my father had started editing the story before my mother was even buried. At the funeral home, he edited it out loud. He stood beside my mother's framed picture and told people he had carried Evelyn through the worst of it. He said that exact sentence to 3 different people. Each time, he lowered his eyes on the word carried. Each time, someone touched his sleeve. I stood near the guest book with a pen that did not write unless you pressed hard. People hugged me. They said I had been a good daughter. My father heard one woman say it and stepped closer, as if praise had wandered into the wrong yard. Mrs. Larkin came last. She did not hug me right away. She looked at my face, then at the way my father's hand rested on the guest book table, covering half the names. She picked up the pen, shook it once, and signed under my mother's picture. Then she leaned close and said, "Your mother knew who stayed." This time I did not laugh. I put my hand over hers. After the burial, my father asked me not to come by the lake house for a few days. He said he needed space. He said it would be easier if I stopped hovering over rooms. That was a strange thing to say to the person who had slept in a chair beside the oxygen machine for 11 months. For the next 2 weeks, Calvin worked quietly. He changed the chain on the front door. He called relatives before I could call them. He moved papers before anyone asked to see them. He scheduled the reading for the 3rd Friday after my mother died, late enough to make himself look orderly, and soon enough that I was still sleeping badly. I drove to the lake house one Thursday, because my mother's blue sweater was still on the back of her chair. I found the front door locked with the chain on. My key opened the deadbolt, but the chain held. My father had never used that chain when my mother was alive. She hated that sound. Through the gap, I could see the living room. The bed was gone. The side table was gone. The small basket with her lotion and tissues was gone. The room looked like nothing had happened there. That was the point. I did not force the door. I stood on the porch with the key in my palm. Rainwater hit the top step in a steady beat. My father was not only taking papers, he was taking the evidence of care. I went back to my car and opened my glove compartment. Inside was the spare key Mrs. Larkin used when I needed someone to sit with my mother. The little brass tag still said Mom, in my own handwriting. I held it until the rain cooled my fingers. That key did not open the chain, it opened something else. Other people had opened that door. Other people had seen the bed, the bottles, the rails, the blue cup, and the nights I thought would never end. That evening, Pastor June called. She did not ask if I was all right. That would have made me lie. She said, "Your mother left something here, and I need to know if Calvin has made love sound like debt." I looked at the locked house through my wet windshield. "Not yet," I said. Pastor June was quiet for one breath. "Then wait," she said, "but do not come alone when he does." The next morning I went to the church. I did not call first. If I called, I knew I would ask too much. I would ask what was in the envelope. I would ask why my mother had waited until the end to hand me a sentence instead of an answer. So I drove there with wet shoes, a folder of pharmacy scans, and the little brass key still in my coat pocket. Pastor June was in the fellowship hall, stacking metal chairs. She had taken off her collar and rolled up her sleeves. I trusted that about her. She never looked too holy to lift something heavy. She saw my face and set one chair down. "Did he say it?" she asked. "Not the exact words," I said. "But he locked the house. He took the care folder. He told me family duty is not ownership." Pastor June's mouth tightened. She did not look surprised. That hurt more than surprise would have. I asked her what my mother had left. She shook her head once. "Not yet." It was not unkind. It was a door staying closed, because the person who built it had written rules on the other side. I wanted to push. I did not. My mother had trusted this woman with something she had not trusted to the drawer in her own house. That mattered. Pastor June pulled a small notebook from the table. "Evelyn gave me one instruction. If Calvin used her death, her care, or her will to erase what you did, I was to bring the envelope." I asked, "Bring it where?" She said, "To the room where he said it." I left the church without the envelope. It was hard, and it was also the first clean line in the whole mess. My father had taken the folder because he could reach it. He could not reach this. On the way home, I stopped at the copy shop beside the grocery store. The young man at the counter asked if I wanted single-sided or double-sided copies. There are days when your life is cracking open, and someone still needs to know how you want the paper fed. "Single," I said. I copied every receipt I still had. The pharmacy scan. The hardware store receipt for the bathroom rail. The invoice for the ramp. The nurse schedule with my number printed as the contact. I copied my mother's discharge notes because the bottom line said, "Primary home contact, Brooke Merritt." At my kitchen table that night, I made a timeline. I wrote dates, not feelings. March 3rd, bed moved downstairs. March 16th, first nurse visit. April 2nd, rail installed. April 29th, church envelope delivered. June 10th, Evelyn died. June 11th, care folder missing. The notebook looked plain. That helped. If I wrote the truth plainly enough, my father could not call it grief. Then I emailed Miss Alvarez, the estate attorney. I had met her once, 3 years earlier, when my mother updated the house papers after a bad fall. Miss Alvarez was small, sharp, and careful with silence. She did not rush people. That made my father dislike her. My email was short. I wrote that I wanted all estate papers read in the presence of witnesses. I wrote that my mother had left church material that might need to be present. I did not accuse my father. I did not mention the locked door. I did not write the word stolen, even though it sat in my mouth like a penny. A woman who explodes first gets remembered as the problem. I had watched my father use that trick on my mother for years. Miss Alvarez replied the next morning. "Please bring any relevant items or witnesses. I will note their presence before any reading begins." That sentence did not save me. It gave the truth a chair. My father called 20 minutes later. His voice was warm. He had already been talking to other people. "Brooke," he said, "I hear you have been reaching out." He made reaching out sound like coughing on the furniture. I said, "I emailed Miss Alvarez." He said, "You could have come to me." I said, "I tried the front door." He paused. "Not long. Calvin Merritt was good at quick repairs." I needed a little privacy in my own home. I said, "It was Mom's home." he said. And now we are going to handle that respectfully. Then his voice lowered. Do not bring church people into a family matter. There it was. Not fear. Not yet. But the shape of fear wearing a pressed shirt. Pastor June knew Mom well, I said. She knew the Sunday version, he said. I knew the marriage. He wanted me to defend my mother's church life. He wanted a side door into an argument. I did not give him one. I said, the reading is at 4 on Friday. I will be there. He sighed. Your mother would hate this. It was a cheap sentence. It cost him nothing and tried to spend her name. I hung up before my voice changed. After that, the calls started going around me. My Aunt Paula called first. She said Dad was worried I had become attached to the lake house. I asked, did he tell you I slept there for 11 months? She said, he said you were very involved. Very involved. That was a neat little box. You could put a daughter in it and close the lid. My cousin texted that grief could make people territorial. An old family friend told me my father had earned peace after losing his wife. Nobody asked whether my mother had earned the truth after losing her voice. By Wednesday, Calvin's version had legs. It walked faster than mine because it was lighter. His story did not carry pill bottles, bath rails, or nights on a vinyl chair. On Thursday morning, I drove back to the lake house. This time, my father was there. His truck sat in the drive. 2 contractor vans were parked behind it. I stayed by my car. Through the open front door, I saw men carrying out the last pieces of the downstairs sick room. The rolling tray, the wedge pillow, the narrow shelf where I had lined up the pill bottles by color, because my mother could still recognize color after she forgot the names. My father stepped onto the porch. You should have called, he said. I said, you changed the chain. He said, I changed a lock on a house I am responsible for. Responsible was his new word. It had better shoes than duty. One of the contractors came out with the blue plastic bin I had used for my mother's washcloths. My father nodded toward the van like he was directing a stage crew. She does not need those things anymore, he said. I said, she is not the only one they belong to. His face hardened just enough for me to see it. Then he smiled, because one of the men looked over. Brooke confuses chores with ownership, he told him. The contractor looked down at the bin. He did not laugh. I walked back to my car before my father could enjoy me staying. That afternoon, Miss Alvarez called. She did not waste words. Your father sent me a revised packet, she said. It names him to manage the house and the remaining care funds. I held the phone tighter. Did my mother sign it? I asked. There is a signature, she said. I am reviewing the dates. That was careful lawyer language, so I asked a simpler question. Does it mention who cared for her at home? There was a pause. Paper moved off. The word was small. It cut clean. Miss Alvarez asked if my mother was still attending church near the end. I told her yes. I told her the date of the Wednesday visit. I did not tell her what was in the envelope, because I still did not know. She said, please make sure Pastor June attends, if she is willing. Then she added, and bring your notebook. I sat at my kitchen table after that call and opened the notebook again. The dates looked different now. They were not memories. They were places where my father's new packet had stepped around the truth. Friday morning came gray and hot. Michigan does that sometimes. It gives you a sky like wet wool and air that sticks to your shirt. My father sent one group text at 9. Today is for closure. Please keep the focus on Evelyn, not conflict. It was a good sentence. Clean, respectable. False right down the middle. Then he sent me a private message. Come alone. Do not embarrass your mother. I looked at the words until they stopped moving. My mother had sat in the passenger seat with a church envelope on her lap. My mother had watched him make duty into a leash. My mother had said I would know. I took a picture of his message. I put my phone on the table. I packed my notebook, the copied receipts, the little brass key, and my mother's teacup. The teacup was not evidence. It could not prove a signature. It could not move money. But my mother's hand had shaken around that cup while my father stood in doorways and called love a duty. I wanted it in the room. At noon, Pastor June called. I will be there if he says what your mother feared he would say, she said. I looked at the teacup wrapped in a dish towel. He will, I said. Pastor June did not answer right away. Then she said, then let him say it in front of the right people. The balance changed there. Not enough for me to feel safe. Not enough for me to know how the envelope would open or what it would take from him. But enough for me to understand this. My father had spent a year making sure he looked like the husband who stayed. On Friday afternoon, he was about to gather the family in the one room where everybody could see who had actually been there. At 3:30 on that third Friday, I parked across from the lake house. I did not pull into the driveway. My father's truck was there. So were two sedans I recognized from family holidays, and one black car that had to be Miss Alvarez's. The contractor vans were gone. The sick room was gone. Calvin had cleared the stage before the audience arrived. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel. My notebook was on the passenger seat, with the copied receipts clipped inside it. My mother's teacup was wrapped in a dish towel in my bag. The little brass key was in my coat pocket, even though it could not open the chain. I had brought useless things on purpose, not useless to the law, useless to him. That mattered. At 3:45, I walked to the front door. The chain was off. My father had opened the house for everyone except the person who had kept it running when my mother could not cross the room. He met me in the entryway. "You came alone," he said. "No," I said. His eyes moved past my shoulder. The porch was empty. I said, "Not every witness has to stand beside me." That irritated him. He hid it by touching his cuff. Inside, the living room looked like a room from before my mother got sick. The sofa was back in the center. The coffee table was polished. Their wedding photo hung over the mantel, straight and bright, like a closing argument. The hospital bed was gone. The walker was gone. The small table where I used to line up her pills was gone. Calvin had not cleaned the room. He had erased it. 11 people were already there. My Aunt Paula sat near the window with her purse on her knees. 2 cousins stood by the bookcase. Mrs. Larkin sat in the chair closest to the kitchen, her hands folded around a tissue she had not used. Miss Alvarez had taken the armchair near the coffee table. A slim folder rested on her lap. My father had placed a thicker packet in the middle of the table. He always liked the largest object in the room to belong to him. "Let's make this simple," he said. Miss Alvarez checked her watch. "I have another appointment this evening, Mr. Merritt, but we will not rush the reading." My father said, "My family has been through enough." He meant himself. I sat on the end of the sofa. I put my bag beside my feet. I did not take out the notebook yet. At 4 o'clock, Miss Alvarez opened her folder. "We are here to review the estate documents of Evelyn Merritt." My father leaned back. His face softened into the expression he used for sympathy cards. Then Miss Alvarez looked toward the doorway. "Is Pastor June expected?" My father answered before I could. "No. This is a family matter," I said. "She was invited." Aunt Paula looked at me. "Brooke, do we need to make this harder?" I kept my eyes on Miss Alvarez. I asked that all relevant material be present. My father gave a small laugh. "Relevant material," he repeated. "That is a very formal way to describe church paper." The first cut landed there. Not deep enough to bleed, deep enough to mark the place. Miss Alvarez looked from him to me. "Has anything from Mrs. Merritt's church been provided to my office?" "No," my father said. "Not yet," I said. Pastor June was not there. My father saw it. He picked up the packet from the coffee table and held it out to Miss Alvarez. "Then we should proceed with what we have." It was a good move. Clean. Calm. Very Calvin. If the envelope was not in the room, it was only a rumor. If it was only a rumor, I was only a grieving daughter trying to slow down a legal reading with church feelings and old receipts. Miss Alvarez did not take the packet right away. My father kept holding it. "A paper can become a weapon if a man is patient enough." "Miss Alvarez," he said, "my wife signed these updates. I understand Brooke is emotional, but we cannot let emotion override Evelyn's final wishes." Aunt Paula nodded once. One cousin looked at the floor. Mrs. Larkin pressed the tissue into a square. I felt the room decide what role it wanted to give me. Daughter. Difficult. Attached to the house. Very involved. Miss Alvarez looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 4:12. "If the envelope is not present," she said, "I can only note that it was referenced." That was the bottom of the room. My father lowered the packet toward her hand. I saw the page edges touch her folder. For a second, every receipt in my bag felt too light. Every date in my notebook felt too private. My mother's sentence sat miles away in a church office, and my father's paper sat in the room with a lawyer's pen beside it. I took out the teacup. I unwrapped it slowly. The saucer clicked once against the table. My father's eyes went to it before he could stop them. It was not evidence. It did not need to be. It was the one thing in that polished room he had forgotten to remove. I said, "Before you read the part about the house, I would like the church envelope noted." My father smiled just enough to let the family know he was still in control. "Brooke," he said, "we are not delaying my wife's estate over funeral clutter." There it was. The door my mother had described without telling me where it led. Miss Alvarez picked up her pen. "Mr. Merritt, is there an envelope?" he said. "There is always an envelope. Programs, hymns, little notes." Evelyn liked making things sentimental. I said. She also liked making things clear. My father turned to me then. All the softness left his face. "You need to be very careful," he said. That was the closest he came to showing the room his real voice. For 1 minute, I thought Pastor June would not come. I thought the envelope would stay sealed while my father's packet became the only thing with weight. Miss Alvarez's pen hovered over her pad. My Aunt Paula stared at my teacup like it had embarrassed her. My father's thumb rested on the top page of the packet, ready to push it forward. I put one hand on the saucer and said, "Please note that he called it funeral clutter." My father's smile came back. Then the doorbell rang. Mrs. Larkin stood up. She did not ask permission. She walked to the entryway with her tissue still in her hand. When she opened the door, Pastor June was on the porch. Her hair was damp from the mist. Her coat was buttoned wrong by one button. She carried a cream-colored envelope against her chest. She looked like a woman who had come from a hospital prayer and had not stopped for herself. Mrs. Larkin stepped aside. Pastor June entered the living room. My father did not stand. That told the room more than standing would have. If you have ever been told your care for a parent was just duty, write "stayed" in the comments. One sealed envelope had just walked into the room my father thought he controlled. Pastor June did not come to me first. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was holding up. She walked to the coffee table and placed the envelope beside my mother's teacup. The room saw the seal before it saw anything else. Evelyn Merritt. My mother's signature crossed the flap in blue ink. Not a printed label, not a church stamp. Her hand. A little shaky. Still hers. Miss Alvarez leaned forward. "Pastor June, can you identify that envelope?" Pastor June said. "Yes. Evelyn placed it in my care 6 weeks before she died." My father let out one breath through his nose. "June, this is unnecessary." Pastor June looked at him. "Evelyn said you might think so." That landed harder than a raised voice. My father stood then. Too late. "I will not have my wife's memory turned into a spectacle," he said. Pastor June did not move her hand from the envelope. "Neither will I." Miss Alvarez closed the slim folder on her lap. The sound was soft. The whole room heard it. My father looked at me, then at the teacup, then at the sealed flap. For the first time that afternoon, he was counting things he had not placed there. He tried one more time. "Brooke was not Evelyn's guardian," he said. "She was not her husband. She was not the one who built this family. She was hired by blood, not loved by it." The words came out colder the second time. They did not hit me the same way. This time, my mother's name was lying on the table between us. Pastor June turned to Miss Alvarez. "Evelyn told me when to open this." Miss Alvarez set her pen down. "Then before I recognize any revised packet, I need to hear what Mrs. Merritt placed in your care." My father's hand went to the papers he had brought. Mine stayed on the saucer. Pastor June broke the seal with her thumb. The paper made a dry sound when it opened. It was small. It still reached every corner of that room. Pastor June took out 3 pages. She did not spread them like evidence. She held them the way she had held my mother's hands after communion. Careful. Steady. Close enough for Miss Alvarez to see the blue ink across the bottom. My father stared at the envelope, not the letter. He still thought the danger was paper. Pastor June looked at Miss Alvarez. "The first page is Evelyn's letter." Miss Alvarez nodded. "Please read only what Mrs. Merritt asked to be read." Pastor June turned the page toward the window light. My mother's handwriting tilted down near the right edge. I knew that tilt. It came when her hand got tired, and she refused to stop. Pastor June began. "My daughter Brooke was not hired by blood. She was the only one who stayed when staying became ugly." My father's face changed before anyone moved. His mouth stayed in the same line. but the skin beside it loosened. It was as if the sentence had reached him under the collar. Aunt Paula's purse slid off her knees and hit the rug. No one picked it up. Pastor June kept reading. She changed my sheets when I was ashamed to ask. She paid for medicine when the card failed. She learned the shape of my pain without making me perform it. If Calvin ever calls that duty, he is not naming her work. He is hiding his absence. The room did not go silent. Real rooms do not go silent. The refrigerator clicked in the kitchen. A cousin breathed too loudly through his nose. Mrs. Larkin pressed her tissue flat between both palms until it tore. My father said, "June." Pastor June did not look at him. "She is my daughter," she read. "She is my witness. She is the one who stayed." That was the sentence. Not because it was pretty. Not because it sounded like a funeral card. Because my father had built the whole afternoon on one lie, and my mother had left one plain sentence that made the lie stand naked in front of everyone. Miss Alvarez leaned forward. "Mr. Merritt, did you know this letter existed?" My father's hand moved to his packet. "Evelyn left church things everywhere." "Miss," Alvarez said. "That was not my question." His fingers stopped. "No," he said. Miss Alvarez asked her second question. "Did you ask Pastor June whether Mrs. Merritt left anything that affected today's reading?" He looked at Pastor June, then at me, then at the packet under his hand. "No," he said again. 2 questions. 2 holes. That was enough. Pastor June set the letter on the coffee table and turned it so the room could see the last paragraph. The paper lay between my mother's teacup and my father's revised packet. My mother's words sat there in blue ink. "Give Brooke the house where she gave me my last year." Aunt Paula covered her mouth. One cousin stepped back and hit the bookcase with his shoulder. "Mrs." Larkin bent forward like someone had touched a bruise she had been hiding. My father looked down at that line. He had cleared the bed. He had taken the rail. He had removed the tray, the lotion basket, the pill shelf, and the blue washcloth bin. He had forgotten my mother knew where she had been loved. For 1 second, he looked old. Not gentle. Not sorry. Just old. Like a man who had spent too long arranging a room and had missed the person's. Then Miss Alvarez reached for the second page. She did not make a speech. She did not turn the room into a courtroom. She only checked the signature, the witness line, and the date. Her thumb moved once over the notary stamp. "This page changes the person authorized to manage the house and remaining care funds," she said. My father stood. "That cannot be accepted today." Miss Alvarez looked at him. "It is already present today." The sentence was simple. It put a lock on the door. Before she moved the packet, Miss Alvarez looked at me. "Do you have the home care notes you mentioned in your email?" I opened my notebook and slid out one copied page. My fingers did not shake. The page was from my mother's discharge folder. The bottom line said, "Primary home contact, Brooke Merritt." I placed the pharmacy receipt beside it, the one from the day the card failed. My name was on the payment line. Miss Alvarez did not need a speech from me. She looked at the 2 pages, then at my father's packet, where my name appeared nowhere. Aunt Paula saw the receipt. Her face changed in a smaller way than my father's had. She had been ready to believe I wanted the house. She had not been ready to look at a paid receipt for medicine. "Mrs." Larkin put one hand on the arm of her chair. Pastor June placed the letter beside the receipt, not over it. My mother's words and my tired paper finally sat in the same room. Miss Alvarez took the thick packet my father had brought and closed it. The cover made a flat sound against the table. Then she slid it to the left, away from the teacup, away from the letter, away from the center of the room. My father reached for it. Miss Alvarez put one hand on top of the packet. "No," she said. One word. Very small. Very useful. She placed my mother's signed page in the center. "I will not recognize the revised packet as the controlling document. This signed instruction controls the reading. Mr. Merritt, your authority to manage the house and remaining care funds ends here." My father's neck reddened above his collar. "You are making a mistake," Miss Alvarez said. "I am making a record." She wrote something on her legal pad. Then she drew one line through the heading on my father's packet. Not angry, not dramatic. Just one clean line. That line took more from him than any speech I could have made. The executor fee went with it. The house control went with it. The care account went with it. The right to stand in that room and call himself the keeper of my mother's wishes went with it. All of it left in one movement. My father looked at me. For years, he had looked at me like a daughter could be managed with tone. In that moment, he looked at me like a person he had failed to measure. I did not smile. I did not thank him for teaching me anything. I only moved my hand from the saucer and folded the dish towel in my lap. Mrs. Larkin stood then. Her knees made a small crack. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, took out a little brass key with a tag tied to it. "Mom, my handwriting." She set it beside the teacup. "Evelyn told me Brooke was the one to call first," she said. That was all. It did not make a legal point. It did not need to. It put a small piece of the year back on the table. It showed the room that the door my father had locked had once opened for people who were helping my mother live. My father stared at the key as if it had been sharpened. Pastor June placed the third page beside the letter. Evelyn asked that Brooke receive the house key today. Miss Alvarez looked at me. "Do you accept responsibility for the property until the final transfer is recorded?" The word responsibility had sounded heavy in my father's mouth. In hers, it sounded like a broom, a light switch, a medicine schedule, and a door left open for the right people. "Yes," I said. My father laughed once. It came out wrong. "This is absurd." No one joined him. Aunt Paula bent down and picked up her purse. She did not put it back on her lap. She held it to her chest with both arms. One cousin stared at the floorboards where the hospital bed had been. He had not known where to look before. Now he did. Miss Alvarez slid my father's packet into her own folder and closed the clasp. "We are finished with this version." My father looked at the closed folder. Then he looked at my mother's letter. Then he looked at me. The room gave him no place to stand where he could still be the grieving husband, the careful manager, and the wronged father all at once. He had to choose one face. For the first time, none of them fit. Pastor June touched the edge of the letter. "Evelyn's remaining instructions can be read with Brooke present." My father's lips parted. I thought he might say my name. He did not. He said, "This house was my life." I looked at the blue ink under my mother's last line. I looked at the teacup. I looked at the key. "No," I said. "It was hers. I could have added more." I left it there. Pastor June folded the empty envelope and placed it under the letter so the seal still showed. Miss Alvarez put her pen down. Mrs. Larkin sat back with both hands in her lap. My father remained standing. Everyone else had finally seen where the room had been pointing. 2 weeks after the reading, the lake house got quiet in a different way. Not sickroom quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for a machine to beep or a glass to fall from a weak hand. This quiet had windows open. It had dust in the sunlight. It had my mother's blue cup on the sink and the smell of lemon cleaner in the hall. Calvin did not come back for the first week. He sent emails through Miss Alvarez instead. They were short, then long, then short again. The first asked when he could retrieve personal items. The second explained why the revised packet had been misunderstood. The third asked if I planned to be reasonable about the boat. Deposit. That was how I learned about the boat. He had used the executor fee he expected to receive as proof of funds for a small fishing boat. He had also paid a non-refundable deposit from his own account because he was so sure the fee would cover it. He had scheduled roof work, dock repairs, and new built-in shelves for the office he had already started calling his. None of it sounded evil when you listed it that way. A boat, a roof, a dock, shelves. He turned, taking into maintenance. Miss Alvarez sent one clean letter back. His authority over the house had ended. His access to the remaining care funds had ended. His expected fee was not payable. Any personal property had to be listed before he entered the house, and I had to approve the time. The repair van never came back. The dock company took down its orange marker from the yard. The boat deposit stayed gone. The shelving company sent a cancellation invoice with my father's name on it, not mine. The care account held $420,000 when my mother's final instructions took effect. Money is a strange thing after death. It looks cold on paper. Then it becomes a man no longer able to open a front door with confidence. It becomes a contractor backing his van out of a driveway. It becomes an orange dock marker pulled from the grass. It becomes a key placed in your palm while the person who lied about you watches from across the room. Victory did not feel loud. It felt like carrying a full laundry basket down a hallway after everyone else had gone home. Heavy. Ordinary. Necessary. At the end of the month, Calvin came to collect his things. Miss Alvarez arranged the time. Mrs. Larkin came over, before he arrived, and sat at the kitchen table with her purse in her lap. Pastor June offered to come too. I told her no. Not because I was brave. Because I wanted one room in my life where my father did not get to gather an audience. He arrived at 10. He wore a navy jacket, even though it was warm. He carried no boxes. That told me he planned to ask for more than he could carry. I opened the door before he knocked twice. He looked past me into the house. His eyes went to the living room first. The sofa was still there. The hospital bed was not coming back. Neither was his version of the year. He said, "I just want what belongs to me." I stepped aside. "The office items are on the table." He walked in like a man visiting a place he used to own. He slowed near the mantel. My mother's photo was still there, but I had moved the wedding picture to a side shelf. In its place, I had put a small frame with a picture of my mother on the dock, wearing a sun hat and laughing at something outside the frame. Calvin noticed. "You moved us," he said. "I moved the photo," he said. "That was our marriage." I said, "No, it was a frame." He turned toward me then. His face tightened. For a second, I saw the same man from the will reading, the one who wanted a room to agree before he hurt me. But Mrs. Larkin was in the kitchen, setting 2 mugs on the table. He heard the ceramic touch wood. He lowered his voice. "I was grieving." I said, "I know." He said, "I said things badly." I said, "You said them clearly." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked older again. This time, the room did not make me soften it for him. "I am sorry things got emotional," he said. That was not an apology. It was a coat thrown over a stain. I picked up the black leather case from the office table and handed it to him. "Anything about the estate goes through Miss Alvarez," he said. "I am still your father." I said, "Yes. That is why this is sad." He stared at me, as if he had expected anger, and did not know what to do with the absence of it. I did not hate him in that moment. Hate would have kept a door open. I simply knew I would not hand him my life again just because he knew the old address. He took the case. At the front door, he paused. "Your mother would not want this." I looked at the teacup on the kitchen shelf. The blue one, clean, empty, waiting for use, not worship. "My mother left instructions," I said. He left without answering. After that, the house became mine in small ways. I changed the locks on a Tuesday. The locksmith was a young woman with a red tool bag and a habit of humming under her breath. When she handed me the new keys, I did not cry. I put one on my ring, one in the drawer by the stove, and one in an envelope for Mrs. Larkin. I opened the curtains in the downstairs room. I did not turn it into a shrine. I did not leave it frozen around the shape of my mother's pain. I brought in a reading chair. I kept the side table. I put the blue cup on the shelf where sunlight could touch it in the morning. One Saturday, Pastor June came by with a loaf of bread from the church kitchen. She did not bring documents. She did not ask me to talk through the reading again. She only stood in the doorway and said, "This house sounds different." I knew what she meant. The floorboards still creaked near the hallway. The old refrigerator still knocked when it shut off. The lake still hit the dock in uneven little slaps. But the house no longer sounded like someone was editing it. I made tea. Pastor June sat at the kitchen table. Mrs. Larkin came over through the side door with her spare key in her hand, held up like a joke she had earned. For 1 hour, no one said my father's name. That was the warmest part. Later, when they left, I washed 3 cups. I dried my mother's blue cup last. I set it back on the shelf and looked at the new key on my ring. A boundary is not revenge. It is the door finally learning its own lock. My father never got the story he wanted. He did not get to be the tired widower cheated by an emotional daughter. He did not get the house, the fee, the care funds, the boat deposit, or the room where everyone nodded for him. He kept his name. He kept his memories. He kept whatever version of himself he could still bear. I kept my mother's words. That was enough. Family, I learned, is not the person standing closest in the funeral photo. It is the person who knows where the spare key is because someone trusted them to come in. It is the pastor who keeps an envelope sealed until the right room hears it. It is the neighbor who remembers who stayed when staying was not pretty. It was never only about money. It was about presence. That's my story. 3 weeks after my mother died. 1 sealed church envelope. 1 blue teacup. 1 little brass key. $420,000 my father thought would make him the keeper of her life, until her own handwriting put the house back in the hands that had held her. If someone has made your care sound small because it did not come with a title, listen to me. You do not have to become loud to become real. Some people will only understand your worth after they lose the right to benefit from it. Share this with someone who stayed. Comment stayed if you know what it costs. Subscribe if you believe love should never have to prove itself to the person who used it. My name is Brooke Merritt. I am 34. I am Evelyn Merritt's daughter. And I am the one who stayed.